Welcome to West Bend and our historic road to the first 100 years. This painting on display at the Historic Museum best depicts some of the history. The painting, by K. Brown, shows on the left the Native Americans encamped on the west bank of the West Branch of the Des Moines River in Palo Alto County. The only explorers before 1833 were trappers, hunters, and traders who roamed the territory, and then it was declared open to the settlers and encouraged by the government with the Homesteaders Act. In 1855-56, the William Carter and Evans families selected claims on the east bank of the Des Moines River, where it made a large bend to the west. This was colonized and called West Bend. The George Jacobs family arrived in 1863. A blacksmith shop, a store, and a post office were located on their homestead. H. Jacobs ran the stage between Humboldt and Emmitsburg. In 1882, the people of the settlement paid a tax of $27.52 to the county for the Cedar Rapids, Iowa Falls, and Northwestern Railroad Company to get them to go through West Bend Township. It was first called Ives Station, but through negotiations, Mr. Carter convinced them to change it to West Bend when the settlement from the river moved to this location. This is a picture of an oil tank delivering wagon. Notice the skis under the tank wagon. Also, the old Lutheran church is in the background. It wasn't all work back in those days. This picture also shows Violet Stone Furden, Bill Stone, and Della Reinhardt having fun on the sled in the snow.
The German Evangelical Peace Church was organized in West Bend in 1890 with a visiting pastor. In 1891, the congregation passed a resolution to build a church, which was later enlarged. Voting members for a number of years, beginning in 1891, were F. Hange, John Fellhauer, Fred Harms, William Rabe, Herman Strucker, William Strucker, H. Alf, John Van Lowe, George Helmke, C. Strite, and Alex Purtle. The house on the right is the parsonage.
This picture is of the United Presbyterian Church, which is built in 1883. In July 1972, the last service was held in this church. When built, it cost about $4,000, and the first pastor was Reverend Dickey. This church was noted at that time for its beautiful pipe organ. This is the Apostolic Christian Church. Between 1868 and 1890, a number of families came to this community, and they met in their homes for worship until 1878, when a small frame church was built. Near the west edge of the lot was a row of stables for the horses, which drew wagon, buggies, and winter sleds. The first minister was John Gerber. All the services were in German or Swiss because those were the languages the family spoke. In 1897, the church was rebuilt and improvements made. This picture is of the first consolidated school in West Bend. It was built in 1883 by William Amos and Mark Gray. These gentlemen were in the lumber business at that time. The school was located in the 400 block 1st Avenue Southeast in West Bend.
In 1893, a new building was built. The school had 8 grades and later added a complete 4-year high school. The first graduating class was the class of 1906.
This view of students is inside the old brick school of 1912. 3 students identified in the front row are Louise Dorweiler, Fern Clark, and George Foley. Far right center is Anna Schmallen, Maxine Knecht's mother. This is an outside view of the first brick public school in West Bend. This is a view from inside a school classroom around 1910 in the first brick public school. This picture is of sled buses in front of the old brick school. They were pulled by horses. Notice the runners on the buses. These buses would tip very easily when it hit a snowbank. When Rex Brown was born, Mamie Nurse rode out to the farm with Richard Brown on the bus, and it tipped over and she got a bad bloody nose. These are school buses in front of the first public school in West Bend. In the spring and fall, this type of bus was used. Dick Brown remembers riding on those buses. This is another view of the buses lined up in front of the old school. This is from the spring of 1899, just 1 year after Father Dauberstein arrived in West Bend. The parish of the St. Peter and Paul Church of 40 families voted to build a school. Here is a picture of the old school being built. Lynette Prohaska, Robinson's dad, helped build it. This picture is of the Catholic school and church in West Bend. The school was built in 1899, and the Catholic church in West Bend was built in 1888 under the supervision of Father J.B. Zigrang of St. Joseph of Bode. The school consisted of 3 departments. There were 5 sisters, of which 3 were teachers, 1 taught music, and 1 was a housekeeper and cook. Classes taught were religion, Bible history, reading, arithmetic, and language. This is a group of people around the storefront of the Union Hotel on the 4th of July. Gesina Munson is in the cart. The Union Hotel is on Main Street where Roop's Furniture used to be. These people are all decorated in their Surrey for the 4th of July parade of 1909. They are located in front of the Defiance Hotel on the corner of Broadway and 1st Street, which is now where Community Lumber is located. Here is a picture of a 4th of July picnic in 1909. Notice the groups seated around a tablecloth on the ground. This picture is also of July 4th, 1909, and it shows a wagon decorated for the parade.
But I had a good chance to get through school, and about the time I got through, graduated from high school, then World War I came along, and I was just 21 in time to sign up for the draft. And I had no excuse. I was young and anxious to go, and I got my father to rent the farm because I knew my turn was coming up in the draft. I volunteered 2 different times, but couldn't get in the Navy or the Marine Corps. I couldn't pass the physical. But they told me I'd pass for the Army all right, and I did. And we got very short training down at Little Rock, Arkansas, and got shipped across. We hadn't had very much training, but we had a good passage across the ocean.
Did you lose many people going over, many soldiers with the flu?
Yes, we did. The flu hit us when we got about halfway across the ocean. And it was something new, and they didn't know how to doctor it. And they began dying with the flu. And they buried them at sea, just sewed them up, and we had canvas hammocks that we slept in. They'd take 2 hammocks and sew a body into that and put iron weights in it and throw them overboard. So we had funerals, and sometimes 2 funerals a day. We went in a large convoy, and we saw the other ships burying their dead too. When they had a funeral, they would stop for just a minute in the convoy and push the bodies overboard. Then they'd start up right away again. The convoys had to zigzag all the way to keep from getting hit by submarine missiles. That's where we were supposed to be assigned to a combat division, but that's where they changed it, and we were assigned to the General Headquarters branch of the service, and we were under General Pershing's personal command. And so General Pershing was pretty busy, but he'd send somebody to inspect the camp, and they were pretty strict, and I got caught on the most important post in the camp when they were inspecting the camp, and they instructed me what to do, because as the general that was inspecting the camp came, I was supposed to turn out the guard for inspection, and I was in front of the guardhouse where we kept the prisoners and all the extra guards, And they told me that as soon as I recognized the general, I was to call out to turn out the guard. And so I called out the guard, and they said if he saluted, then you'd say, never mind the guard. That means that he didn't want to respect the guard. But he came on towards the camp, and I ordered him to halt when he got as close as he was allowed to come. And he saluted me. That was one time a general saluted me first, and then I returned the salute. But he wanted to know how long I'd been in the Army. That's the most insulting thing they can ask a soldier. I told him about 2 months. Well, he wasn't too bad. But he said, don't you know you never turn out the guard on Sunday? And I didn't know it was Sunday anymore. So I didn't tell him that. But anyway, I got by pretty well. He wasn't too rough with me.
In 1882, Robert McFarland and McCormick started a general store and bought out James Evans' stock. In the fall, McFarland bought out McCormick's share of the store and also bought the William Amos building and his stock of goods. This is the beginning of what later became known as McFarland and Walker in later years. It was located where the Painted Pony is now. This is a picture of the inside of the old Forsyth Tavern. When the building was torn down, the beautiful bar was moved over to where the Painted Pony Tavern now is located. Our public school. While it was being built in 1916 to 1917, the superintendent was Mr. DeYoung. West Bend Main Street on Peace Day, November 11, 1918. On the right is W.W. Stone, and businesses on the left are the Union Block Building and the Chloe Nason General Store. This was prior to the Franklin Hotel being built. A photo of an early steel-wheeled tractor with chain steering. Picture was taken in front of the John Rinks Cafe and J.L. Reed Implement Building. Location is where there are 2 empty lots beside Barb's Beauty Shop. This picture is of 3 loads of hogs being drawn by Frank Balgeman's tractor to the Phillips hog buying station in West Bend.
Oats are ripe, and we cut them with a binder and pulled with 4 horses. And we tie the oats into bundles. We put 9 bundles in a shock. The shocks are leaned up against each other like a teepee, and we put one across the top for a cap. The cap helps keep the moisture out if it rains. After they're dried for about 3 weeks, they come with a thrashing machine. The neighbors brought the bundle racks and the wagons. The bundles are all loaded on the racks by hand with a pitchfork. It was an art to stack a nice, neat load of bundles. The racks were pulled up to the separator of the thrasher and pitched in 1 bundle at a time. It beats the oats off of the straw, and the oats go into the wagon and the straw goes into the pile.
The oats were shoveled off to the bin, and the straw was loaded into the stack out in the field. The straw was later hauled back into the buildings for bedding for the livestock. It was always a hot and dirty job. The most fun we had while thrashing was the lunches and the big meals that the ladies prepared for us. Our thrashing group was about 10 or 12 different farms and took about 2 weeks depending on the weather. Thrashing came to an end in the early 40s when many farmers bought combines.
Matt Serensky graduated from high school in 1912. That year, he decided to dedicate his life to assisting in building of the grotto with Father Daberstein. By 1901, word was out that Father Daberstein planned to build a grotto. Some indication was given as to the extent of his dreams when, a few years later, he purchased a large house and 8 acres of land just north of the Catholic Church. The land contained an unsightly slough, and with the help of recruited farmers, it was transformed into a pond in 1906. This picture shows the transformation. P.P. Coupland's gold machine is the largest one he made. There were several sizes built. They were built in a building that was last used as a blacksmith shop by Marvin Bachman. A 1918 senior class play cast pictured are Esther Buttermore, Irene McFarland, Mary Ellen Nason, Rosita Williams, and June Miller. Main Street in the early 1930s. From the corner is McFarland's. Then P.P. Coupland had a drugstore in the center section, which was later Chris Cafe. Next to Coupland's was Fleming Hardware, later taken over by H.H. Drussel, and then Jones's Hardware, and now is the Painted Pony Complex. Next, Emerson's had a candy and ice cream store where the bakery was in later years. To the right of the bakery was a bank. This is the Union Block building. It was constructed in 1894. At one time it had 4 businesses: a theater, furniture store, cafe, and tavern. Gilchrist Company elevator before 1920, located northeast of tracks. Davenport Elevator Company purchased the business in 1920. Carl Kruger was the first manager of the Davenport Elevator. This is a picture of a country school. The children living on farms attended these country schools. We believe this is the Garfield Center School. It now is located on the Joe Schmidt farm and used as a butchering shop.
I will be 100 years old on November 3rd, 2006. Did I go to college to be a teacher? I went to high school and we had normal training until we took state tests and was able to teach. I went to West Bend in 1928 and taught in a country school, and I had all 8 grades, and I was there 3.5 years. And then I went into West Bend and taught 2nd grade for 4 years. The schoolhouse was 3 miles north of West Bend, right on the, I think it's 15. And then it was a little bit west. And most of the pupils were like a mile or mile and a half from school. So they would either have to be brought or walk. But I roomed in a place about not quite a mile from the school. So I walked. In the 1st, 2nd grade, and I'm pretty sure that it was Kay Beavers, Helen DeGroat, Ida Mae Holford, Delbert Burninghouse. And I had him in 2nd grade, and I think he was in the 1st, 2nd grade class that I had him with. Alice Banworth was in, but I think she was in my 1st, 2nd grade too. I taught Furner Works and in 2nd grade, and he drew the nicest pictures. I think it was Delbert Hoover, Dale's grandparents, and out on a farm. And I'm not sure if that was the 1st grade, 2nd grade, if that was the 1st, 2nd grade class or not. But Helen DeGroat, Kay Beavers. Her dad was a lumberman in West Bend. In the country school, I had Laura, Della, and Daniel Zoll, and they were Ern and Lizzie Zoll's children.
What was your favorite subject to teach?
Oh, I think reading. I think they actually enjoyed reading the most, even in the second grade and all the grades in school. But see, when in the country school, everybody could listen to everybody reciting.
How did the children get to school?
Well, a lot of them had walked to school, but many of them was 1.5 miles away. Like the Metzger family, they drove a horse to school and then put it in the barn that was close to the school. Well, in the rural school, it was a mighty busy day because there was one grade right after the other that would recite, and we had double seats, and there'd be a bigger pupil in the seat, and then one whose feet didn't touch the floor. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, the whole thing, from the first grade to the 8th grade. Two pupils would go after a bucket of water, and sometimes they'd have to go like 3 times a day, and that was like about 1/2 mile.
Tell me what the children did for lunch.
Well, each pupil brought their own lunch, and the teacher brought her own lunch. It was like a sandwich, probably fruit, sauce, piece of cake, or cookie. We didn't have hot lunches until we got into town school. They had reading and writing and arithmetic, of course, and somewhat of geography. Not a lot of geography. And then we would have gym classes and play games. Andy Iover was one of the very run, sheep run, follow the leader, pull away. Ball, after ball got to be played in school, we pretty much played ball. Well, it'd be a softball, baseball type. At basketball more than baseball, down in the grades.
So did you teach music in second grade?
No, they were when you got into town. I taught music in the country when there was a big school. But no, the music teacher would come into the room and teach the music in the second grade. But second grade was fun to teach because they'd already been to school and had a little background so that they could kind of go ahead themselves. So that second grade was and more interesting than having all the grades together.
How many students were usually in your second grade classes?
They would be 20, 25. No, in the country school, I usually had 28, 29, or 30 because there was lots of Metzgers and there were lots of quite a few Zouks and there were Bells. We always took one day, one afternoon, we would take a little trip to the grotto to walk and just walk from the schoolhouse, and that was quite a distance at that time. That would be a field trip. I just liked West Bend for one thing. The people were very gracious.
Picture of Main Street before 1916 looking north. West Bend Auto and Bill's Fix-It Shop on the right. Journal and Telephone Company on the left. A view of South Broadway, looking south from the business district before roads were paved. A view of the BCR&N Railroad Depot looking northwest. This picture was taken after the Car Height loading dock was removed in the 1920s. The depot was on the east side of Main Street. A view of the West Bend Depot looking north.
There were 4 trains that went through West Bend at that time. Passenger trains went back and forth.
William R. Banwert purchased a store from Edward Lampman in 1905. He operated the store for 5 years before building a new one. In 1910, Mr. Banwert decided to build a new building. He moved both buildings into the street and operated from there until his new building was built. On the left is the West Bend Savings Bank, now occupied by North Iowa Real Estate and also the home of Creighton and Sarah Nelson. A winter scene of 1935-36 at the Jacobs farm. Notice the snow was up to the eaves of the barn. In 1920, the Catholic school needed additional space. The frame church was dismantled and the lumber used to enlarge the school. This was the beginning step to build a new brick church. In early 1921, the cornerstone was laid. In 1922, the church was formally blessed and dedicated. By 1912, the time was right for Father Dauberstein to begin the actual construction of the grotto. This picture was taken sometime later while he was working on it. This is a picture of one of the early grotto. It eventually would be transformed into a city block-sized grotto with a park-like setting for locals and many visitors to enjoy. Picture of the grotto near completion. In 1946, Father Graving was assigned to West Bend as assistant pastor of St. Peter and Paul Church. He spent the next 8 years working with Father Dauberstein in the parish and on the grotto until Father Dauberstein's death in 1954. At that time, the grotto was about 80% completed. This picture shows the crowd visiting the grotto in the earlier days. The West Bend Community School modernized with getting 6 new buses for picking up the students around the late 1930s. Rex Brown remembers they had 2 Chevys, 2 Fords, and 2 Dodges. C.E. Charlie Simmons constructed this filling station in May of 1923. He sold Royal Crown gasoline and Polarine oil. It was located north of the city light plant. This is a picture of the Windsor Hotel on a hot summer night. People were gathered to visit. It was located where Community Lumber is now. A picture of the West Bend Athletic Club. Left to right, George Robinson, Earl Cobb, Fred Hoskin, Irvin Spencer, Professor Clevenger, Worth Carpenter, Jordan Mikes, Earl Blythe Barrett. This is Mr. H.N. Riggins, who leased and operated the Union Hotel from 1910 to 1919. A picture of the McFarland home with neighborhood children. The McFarlands were prominent people in early West Bend. They operated a grocery store and a creamery. R.M.J. McFarland was a member of the West Bend Building and Loan Association and was an assessor in our town. The West Bend 5th grade class in 1930. Some of the local people pictured are Keith Shellmeyer, Madeline Gerber Banwart, and Elma Zog Mogler. Girls athletic team in West Bend about 1910. Back row, second from left, is Irene Hoover, Keith Shellmeyer's mother. Picture shows 1920s boys basketball team. Some of the players identified are Herman Ludwig, Arnie Wilderman, Cornelius Jurgens, and Bill Schmidt. On the left is the Wilson Hardware and right Mike's Meat Market. Both buildings were erected at the same time and constructed by a man, Otto Nitsky of Mankato, Minnesota. He also constructed the Catholic Church. The building north of the meat market burned and a new building was built in 1934, which housed the Vos drugstore with Gus Vos the pharmacist and his son, Carl the jeweler. A view of Main Street west side facing south. The first building is the post office, and next was Dorweiler's department store, before 1915, which is now the community center.
All farmers had their chickens. Everybody had farmers and chickens, and there was chickens to sell. And then he used to have an egg route that he'd go around to the farmers and get the cases of eggs. And then the eggs from some of the stores would take some to retail out to the customers. That's where they got them then.
Then did you and Cliff take over the business from your father?
Yes.
Snowbanks in 1936. Alvin Brown, Ed Stottleman, and young Rex Brown are on top of the snowbank. Below is Art Stottleman with Penny the dog. They are in the process of smoking meat with the smoker in a cavern in the snowbank. A picture of the winter of 1936. The boys, Bob, Dick, and Rex Brown, standing on a bank of snow north of the barn. Ed Stottleman, Alvin Brown, Rex Brown holding their rings of smoked bologna about 1936. Enjoying the summer by eating watermelon about 1940. Rex Brown, Herb Morey, Dennis Brown, Dean Brown, and Howard Morey. This is a picture of the west side of the Champlin service station around 1940. Notice the fill pipes and the vent pipes for the underground tanks, and two men having a conversation with a chicken. A Methodist church picnic around 1914. The group is identified in the Historical Society scrapbook. Some of the familiar names are Morey, Schreiber, Andrade, Campbell, Shellmeyer, Fisher, Stone, Coupland, Mance, Pirtle, DeBolt, DeWitt, and Schneider. Students inside of a country school. Front row from left, Conrad Schmidt, George Bonstetter, unknown, Harold Bonstetter, a visitor, Ben Banwart, Elizabeth Banwart, Martha Van Lowe, Marie Schmidt, Louisa Banwart. Second and third rows from left, unknown, Mike Schmidt, unknown, Nathan Banwart, Mary Rabe, Mike Thill, Elizabeth Schmidt, Lena Banwart, Silas Banwart, Henry Schmidt, Martin Bonstetter, unknown, and the teacher Alex Pirtle. West Bend Creamery was erected in 1928. This shows 4-H members and their calves. Taken in front of Union Building. At that time, one of the businesses was a pool and billiard hall. A picture of an older horse-drawn school bus in 1928 and driven by Charlie Schmidt. It was taken in front of the Orpheum Theater, where City Hall is located now. The Journal office is shown on the right. The Orpheum Theater was called the West Bend Opera House in 1922. Passengers were Louis Jurgens, Bill Schmidt, Marie Dunn Wilderman, Cornelius Jurgens, Laurel Wooster, Regina Dunn Forsyth, Wilda McCullough, Dorothy Dunn, Henry Zinnel, Unknown Wooster, Harlan Wooster, Vera White, Edna Jurgens Schuler, Keith Shellmeyer, Gilbert Schmidt, Edna Storsund Schmidt, Roland Schmidt, and Lillian Schmidt Longseth. An opera house production of the Gypsy Rover. It was upstairs in the former Roop's Furniture. A Fairbanks Morse engine powering an electric generator in the new West Bend Municipal Light Plant in 1915. George Schreiber Produce was the forerunner of Boost Produce. Mr. Schreiber had been manager for Brule, Morse & Company prior to his purchasing the business in 1908. It is located where the Ford Garage is now. Schreiber sold the business to Jake Boos and son Byron in 1922. 1938, Main Street looking north. Notice the cars at that time. The railroad came to West Bend in 1881. A picture of the Burlington, Cedar Rapids and Northern Railroad track. The depot is on the left and Gilchrist Elevator is in the background. The Brick Block Building, built in 1890 as a 3-front store by a group calling themselves West Bend Building Company. First occupants were McFarland Store, P.P. Coupland Drug, and Martin Brother Hardware. Picture of Father Dauberstein in later years. Father Dauberstein had no blueprint of his plan. He was not embarking on the construction of one grotto, but of many grottos as part of a whole. A photo of cars sold by West Bend Auto Company when owned by Wally Higgison and Jens Peterson. The car on the right is a Henry J, and the others are Kaisers and Frasers around 1948. Car with air conditioner unit on top. A storage building belonging to J.B. Mertz and Son circa 1950. It was located along Highway 15 south of the elevator office. A photo of the building built by Louis Schaefer Jr., for use as a Chevrolet automobile and J.I. Case equipment in 1948. The cement block came from Ben Metzger Hollowstone Block Company. Later it was converted to a bowling alley. It has now been raised. Joe Amdahl in front of the West Bend Locker in 1930. It was purchased in 1967 by Norbert and Maxine Connect. Mr. Connect had managed the plant since 1946. In 1978, Mark and Lori Skoglund purchased the business, soon after Norbert's death. Norbert Connect had been in business 32 years. The Davenport Elevator after 1920. Jim Olson was the last manager. In 1960, it was purchased by the West Bend Elevator Company. Many vehicles lined up to dump grain at the elevator. Notice the car pulling the wagon. A picture of the Apostolic Christian Church from 1947 to 1966. In 1954, more Sunday school rooms were added in a basement addition to the west. The original processing alfalfa plant started by Arnie and Edwin Banwart. It is now the Protein Resources Plant. Number 1. Oil tank. We burned a very heavy fuel oil that had to go through a preheating device before the burner nozzle could spray it into the firebox. Number 2. Cylindrical firebox. Not sure just what was the function of the blower on top of the stand was. Number 3. Rotating drying drum about 30 feet long. Number 4. Conveyor of chopped green alfalfa. It was powered through a variable speed gearbox and was manually adjusted according to the outlet temperature on the far end of the rotating drum. Number 5. Alfalfa green chop being unloaded from the forage wagon. We were using a canvas bottom unloading system. It was a real pain. Number 6. Power unit that turned the pipe on, which the canvas was wound as it moved the green chop toward the back of the wagon. Number 7. Cooling tower for the dried alfalfa, and the other one is the dust collector for the hammer mill that ground the dry alfalfa into meal. The meal was then bagged, moved to storage. We first had a handheld sewing machine to close the bags, but changed to a system with pre-sewn bags with an opening to receive a 3-inch tube enclosed auger. The filled bag was closed by tucking in the paper around the opening. With the help of Dave Zog, we made the bagging machine ourselves using some information found in some commercial literature. West Bend Auto Company owners Wally and Annabelle Higgison and Jens Peterson. Children walking downtown as a class. This was before the street was paved, which came in the 1950s. The water fountain was removed in the 70s. Picture of the school basketball team of 1918. Elaine Hinton and Lloyd Hayne in the 1930s dressed up for a play.